Maybe it's better if you sit this one out, Evelyn. My daughter-in-law whispered beside the photographer's platform, her smile polished and gentle enough that anyone watching would have mistaken it for kindness. We're trying to keep the family photos elegant this year. I stood there holding the small silver clutch I bought for the occasion, feeling the ballroom lights suddenly too bright against my skin. Around me, crystal chandeliers shimmered above round tables covered in ivory linen, while waiters carried trays of champagne through the country club ballroom in Fairfield County. My granddaughter Chloe's engagement celebration was supposed to be one of those rare evenings that stitched families closer together. At least, that's what I had believed when I paid for most of it 3 months earlier. The photographer adjusted his camera while Vanessa lightly touched my elbow and guided me backward like someone carefully moving a piece of furniture out of frame. It's just immediate family near the stage, she added softly. You understand, right? Immediate family. The word settled into my chest with a strange heaviness. My son Michael stood only a few feet away in his navy suit, pretending to study the seating chart mounted near the dance floor. He heard every word. I know he did. But he never turned around. I smiled anyway because women my age learned long ago that dignity sometimes means surviving humiliation without letting your hands shake in public. Of course, I said quietly. I wouldn't want to ruin the picture. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed instantly, relieved I had made things easy for her. That was the role they all seemed to expect from me lately. Easy. Quiet. Invisible. The photographer began arranging everyone beneath the floral arch near the grand piano while I stepped aside beside a row of decorative palms near the catering station. Chloe looked beautiful in her pale blue dress, her blonde curls pinned carefully behind one ear, and for a moment I focused only on her smile because it hurt less than watching my own son avoid my eyes. Guests laughed softly as glasses clinked together. Somewhere behind me, Frank Sinatra played through hidden speakers. The room smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume. I stood there alone while the family I had spent decades building posed together without me. Nobody asked where I should stand. Nobody saved me a place. The photographer lifted his camera. Closer together, he called cheerfully. Perfect family. Vanessa rested her hand proudly on Michael's arm. Chloe leaned against her fiancé. Even my sister Patricia moved into frame beside them after glancing awkwardly in my direction. Then the flash went off. I watched the picture happen without me. The strange thing about heartbreak at 68 is that it rarely arrives loudly. It comes quietly, disguised as little moments everyone else considers harmless. A missing chair at Thanksgiving. A forgotten invitation. A conversation that stops when you enter the room. Death by 1,000 polite exclusions. I wandered toward the edge of the ballroom where oversized windows overlooked the golf course glowing beneath soft evening lights. Outside, the November air darkened the rolling hills while small white lanterns lined the walking paths. I remembered when Michael was 7 years old and cried because he thought I would miss his elementary school Christmas concert after my double shift at the hospital. I had driven 23 miles through a snowstorm that night just to make it before the curtains opened. He spotted me in the audience, and waved so hard his paper Santa hat nearly fell off. Back then, my presence mattered to him. Now it felt like something they managed carefully, like an embarrassment to contain before guests noticed. Mrs. Carter? One of the servers interrupted gently. Would you like another sparkling water? I realized my glass was empty. Thank you, I said, accepting it with both hands mostly to hide how cold my fingers had become. Across the ballroom, Vanessa laughed at something one of the donors said while subtly adjusting Chloe's necklace for the cameras still moving around the room. She looked perfectly composed. Perfectly admired. The kind of woman magazines describe as graceful and polished. People loved Vanessa instantly when they met her. I used to love her too. That might have been the hardest part. A few minutes later, I made my way toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, needing a moment away from the music and the smiling faces. As I passed near the partially open doors of the private lounge, I heard Vanessa's voice again. Honestly, she whispered with a soft laugh, Evelyn just doesn't fit the image anymore. She makes the family look old-fashioned. Another woman chuckled sympathetically. That must be difficult for Michael. I stopped walking. My hand tightened around the sparkling water glass. Vanessa lowered her voice further, though I still heard every word clearly. We're trying to build the right connections now. The last thing we need is someone embarrassing us in front of people who matter. For a moment, the hallway seemed strangely still around me. I stared down at the pale gold carpet beneath my shoes while the sounds of distant laughter drifted through the ballroom behind me. Then I lifted my head slowly, straightened my shoulders, and continued walking as if I had heard nothing at all. But something inside me had shifted quietly into place, cold and sharp and impossible to ignore. I left the country club 20 minutes later without saying goodbye to anyone. The valet brought my silver Lexus around while guests inside continued laughing beneath the chandeliers, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my family had shifted in the span of a single evening. The young valet smiled politely as he opened my door. Have a wonderful night, ma'am. I nodded and thanked him, then sat behind the wheel for several seconds without turning the engine on. My hands rested quietly in my lap while the glow from the club entrance reflected against the windshield. Through the tall glass windows, I could still see flashes from the photographer's camera. Vanessa stood at the center of every picture. Michael beside her. Chloe smiling between them. A perfect family portrait. One carefully edited before it was ever printed. I finally started the car and drove slowly down the long curved driveway lined with trimmed hedges wrapped in white lights. The November rain had started lightly by then, thin streaks catching the headlights as I turned onto the main road toward home. Fairfield looked beautiful at night this time of year. Small cafes still glowing downtown. Storefronts decorated for early Christmas shoppers. Couples walking beneath umbrellas along the sidewalks. The world outside remained warm and ordinary while something cold settled deeper inside my chest with every mile. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the rain had become steadier. My house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac where Michael used to ride his bicycle in circles until sunset during summer evenings. I parked in the driveway and noticed the porch light automatically flick on, illuminating the wreath I had hung 2 days earlier. For a moment, I stayed in the car listening to the soft ticking sound of cooling windshield wipers. I did not cry. That surprised me more than anything. 20 years ago I would have cried immediately. Maybe even confronted them. But age changes the shape of pain. It becomes quieter. Heavier. More observant. Inside the house, silence greeted me like an old companion. I slipped off my heels near the front door and carried them upstairs in one hand. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times while I moved through the darkened rooms, turning on only small lamps instead of the overhead lights. I had always hated harsh lighting at night. It made empty rooms feel emptier. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and noticed my hands no longer trembling. That frightened me a little. There was something unnatural about how calm I suddenly felt. As if my mind had stepped back from the hurt and started studying it instead. I carried the water upstairs and changed into a cream-colored robe before sitting at the edge of my bed. Across the room stood the walnut bookshelf Harold built for me 30 years ago during one rainy winter when we could not afford expensive furniture. My late husband had measured every shelf twice because he knew how much I loved old hardcover novels. Michael used to crawl beneath that bookshelf as a little boy and pretend it was his secret fort. I closed my eyes briefly at the memory. Back then our home felt full of noise. Basketball shoes abandoned near the stairs. Science fair projects spread across the dining table. Burned grilled cheese sandwiches Michael tried making by himself when he was 12. Ordinary little things that once felt permanent. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out an old family photo album without entirely meaning to. The leather cover had faded over the years, softened from decades of handling. I turned the pages slowly beneath the warm bedside lamp. There was Michael at age 8 holding a fishing pole almost taller than he was during our trip to Cape Cod. Another photo showed him asleep against my shoulder during a 4th of July parade after insisting he was too grown up for naps. Then came college graduation pictures. Thanksgiving dinners. Christmas mornings. Chloe as a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket while I stood beside Vanessa in the hospital smiling proudly. I paused there for a long moment. Vanessa looked genuinely happy in that photograph. So did I. It is strange how betrayal rarely begins with cruelty. Most of the time it begins with trust. I kept turning pages until I noticed something unsettling. The newer the photographs became, the less often I appeared in them. At first it was subtle. One missed vacation. One holiday gathering where I happened to be the person holding the camera instead of standing in front of it. Then more birthdays where I appeared only at the edges of group pictures. Half visible. Cropped. Smiling from corners. By last Christmas, there was not a single photo including me at all. I sat perfectly still staring down at those pages while rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows. A memory surfaced suddenly. Last spring during Chloe's dance recital, Vanessa had insisted I sit near the back because the front section was reserved for parents. Another time she gently suggested I skip a charity dinner because the event would involve a younger crowd. At the time, I accepted those explanations without question because I trusted family the way people trust gravity. Automatically. Completely. But now each memory returned sharper than before, fitting together with awful precision. I closed the album slowly and rested my hand against the cover. Somewhere deep inside the house, the heating system clicked on with a low hum. I looked around my bedroom at the framed photographs, the antique dresser, the folded quilt at the foot of the bed. Everything appeared exactly the same as it had yesterday. Yet nothing felt the same anymore. Because for the first time, I was beginning to understand that Vanessa had not simply excluded me from one photograph tonight. She had been carefully removing me from the family itself for years. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November morning where the sky looked unfinished, and the trees outside my bedroom window stood bare against the wind. I woke before 6 even though I had barely slept. For several minutes I remained beneath the blankets staring at the ceiling while yesterday replayed itself piece by piece in my mind. Vanessa guiding me away from the photographer. Michael refusing to look at me. The words I overheard outside the private lounge. She makes the family look old-fashioned. I expected to feel devastated when I woke up. Instead, I felt alert. Almost painfully alert. Like someone who had finally put on glasses after years of blurry vision. Downstairs, the coffee maker hissed softly while I stood in the kitchen wearing thick wool socks and Harold's old navy cardigan. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle I forgot to blow out the night before. I carried my coffee into the sunroom overlooking the backyard and watched the wind scatter leaves across the grass. This room used to be Michael's favorite place when he was little. He would sit cross-legged on the rug building entire cities out of toy trains while Harold read the newspaper nearby. Sometimes I still caught myself expecting to hear those sounds again. I took a slow sip of coffee and opened my phone. The engagement party photographs had already been posted online. Vanessa worked fast. There she was standing beneath the floral arch smiling elegantly beside Chloe. Another photo showed Michael laughing with several business associates near the champagne tower. Hundreds of comments filled the page. Beautiful family. Perfect evening. Stunning celebration. I scrolled carefully through every image until I reached the final group portrait taken beneath the chandeliers. My chest tightened slightly. I was not in a single photograph from the event. Not one. It was as though I had never been there at all. I set the phone face down on the glass table beside me and stared out toward the backyard again. Then another memory surfaced quietly. 3 summers ago, Vanessa organized a 4th of July barbecue at their lake house in Connecticut. I had arrived carrying homemade peach cobbler while everyone gathered near the dock watching fireworks across the water. At one point I offered to help set the tables outside, but Vanessa smiled tightly and said, "Why do not you relax instead? We already have a system." I remembered standing awkwardly near the kitchen island afterward while guests drifted past me in conversations I could never quite enter. Later that night, family photos appeared online again. Everyone smiling beneath red and blue lanterns beside the lake. I had taken the pictures myself. Another memory followed immediately after. Chloe's high school graduation dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. Vanessa switched the seating cards moments before everyone sat down, placing me at the far end of the table beside two distant relatives from her side of the family while Michael, Chloe, and the others sat together near the center. "This just works better for conversation flow," she explained casually. At the time I believed her because decent people tend to assume honesty in others. But now those moments return transformed. Not accidents. Not misunderstandings. A pattern. I carried my empty coffee mug back into the kitchen and stood quietly at the sink while rain tapped against the windows again. My reflection in the glass looked older this morning. Not weaker. Just tired in a deeper way. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from realizing you spent years excusing behavior that should have broken your heart much sooner. Around 10 o'clock my phone buzzed with a text message from Vanessa. "Thank you again for helping make last night so special." Chloe was thrilled. "We should do lunch sometime soon." The message ended with a white heart. Emoji. I stared at the screen for several seconds before setting the phone down without responding. Her ability to move seamlessly between cruelty and charm unsettled me more than the humiliation itself. She behaved like someone carefully managing a brand rather than a family. Around noon I drove to the grocery store because ordinary errands felt safer than sitting alone with my thoughts all day. The parking lot was crowded with early holiday shoppers pushing carts through the damp, cold air. Inside, soft Christmas music played overhead while people compared pie fillings and wrapping paper near seasonal displays. Life continuing normally around me felt strangely comforting. I moved slowly through the aisles selecting soup, bread, fresh apples, and coffee filters I did not actually need. Near the dairy section, I heard someone call my name. "Evelyn?" I turned to find Margaret Hayes approaching with a carton of eggs tucked beneath one arm. Margaret had been Harold's closest friend for over 30 years before he passed away. Elegant even in a raincoat, she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who noticed more than she ever said aloud. "I heard about Chloe's party," she said warmly. "How was it?" Something in her expression made me pause. Not curiosity exactly. Concern. I forced a small smile. "Beautiful venue. Vanessa planned everything perfectly." Margaret studied my face for a moment too long. Then she lowered her voice slightly. "Evelyn, dear, are you all right?" The question caught me off guard in the worst possible way because I suddenly realized how long it had been since anyone sincerely asked. I looked away toward the rows of refrigerated shelves while a young employee stacked yogurt nearby. "I am fine," I answered automatically. Margaret did not move. "Harold used to say you always answered that way when something was deeply wrong." My throat tightened unexpectedly. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Margaret sighed softly and adjusted the scarf around her neck. "There are some things I think you need to know," she said quietly. "About Vanessa. About what people have been saying." A cold feeling moved through me then. Slow. Certain. Like the first crack spreading beneath ice. Margaret and I ended up sitting in the small cafe beside the grocery store because neither of us seemed willing to continue the conversation under fluorescent lights near the yogurt section. The cafe smelled like roasted coffee beans and cinnamon pastries, and soft jazz played low through hidden ceiling speakers while rain streaked down the windows facing the parking lot. We chose a quiet booth near the back. Margaret removed her gloves carefully before wrapping both hands around her teacup. For several moments she said nothing at all, and somehow that silence frightened me more than if she had spoken immediately. "You are beginning to notice it now, are you not?" she asked gently. I stared down at the untouched coffee in front of me. "Notice what exactly?" Margaret tilted her head slightly, studying me with sad understanding. "The way Vanessa has been reshaping how people see you." My stomach tightened. Outside, shoppers hurried through the rain carrying paper bags and umbrellas while inside the cafe everything remained warm and ordinary. I suddenly hated how normal the world looked while my life quietly unraveled beneath it. "I do not understand," I said carefully, though part of me already did. Margaret sighed softly. "Evelyn, about 6 months ago, Vanessa mentioned during a charity luncheon that you had been becoming forgetful lately. I looked up sharply. Forgetful? Little things at first. Margaret continued cautiously. She said you repeated stories, misplaced important documents, became emotional in social settings. I stared at her without speaking. Margaret's expression tightened with discomfort. Most people assumed she was simply worried about you. She framed it that way. Concerned. Protective. A strange ringing filled my ears for a moment. Emotional in social settings. The phrase sounded clinical somehow. Deliberately chosen. That is absurd, I said quietly. I have never had memory issues. I know that, Margaret answered immediately. Harold trusted you with every financial detail in your household until the day he passed away. You are one of the sharpest women I know. She hesitated before continuing. But Vanessa has been planting these ideas carefully, quietly, for a long time. I leaned back slowly against the booth while the waitress passed carrying plates of toasted sandwiches to another table. Somewhere near the register, silverware clinked softly against ceramic dishes. Tiny, ordinary sounds continued all around me while every memory from the past several years rearranged itself inside my mind. Suddenly Chloe's strange comments made sense. Last Easter she had laughed awkwardly and said, "Grandma gets confused with dates sometimes." At the time I assumed she was teasing harmlessly because I arrived 30 minutes early to brunch. Another time Michael insisted on driving me home after a theater performance even though I had driven myself perfectly well for decades. "Just being careful," he had said lightly. I remembered Vanessa watching us from the sidewalk with an expression I could not identify back then. Satisfaction. That was what it had been. Quiet satisfaction. Margaret stirred her tea slowly. "There is more." I felt my chest tighten again. "Go on." She lowered her voice further. 2 weeks ago at the Winchester Women's Foundation dinner, Vanessa told several people she was worried you should not be living alone much longer. I blinked slowly. Living alone? She mentioned assisted living communities. Said she and Michael were trying to help you transition gently because you resisted change. The cafe suddenly felt too warm. I loosened my scarf slightly while my pulse hammered steadily beneath my ribs. Assisted living. They had discussed my future publicly without ever speaking to me first. Like I was already fading. Already incapable of deciding my own life. "Did Michael say any of this himself?" I asked finally. Margaret hesitated too long before answering. That silence told me everything. "He did not stop her," she admitted softly. I looked away toward the rain sliding down the windows. A little girl near the entrance laughed while trying to balance a muffin wrapper on her nose, and her mother smiled patiently beside her. I watched them because it was easier than allowing myself to fully absorb what Margaret was saying. There is a particular kind of pain that arrives when betrayal is not loud or explosive but carefully organized behind your back by the very people who smile at you during holidays. "Why are you telling me now?" I whispered. Margaret's eyes softened immediately. "Because yesterday at the engagement party I watched you standing alone near the catering station while everyone else posed for photographs." Her voice lowered further. "And because Vanessa looked relieved you stayed out of them." My throat tightened painfully. Margaret reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Evelyn, I think they are preparing to slowly remove you from important decisions. Socially first. Then legally." I stared at her in silence. The words landed with terrifying clarity because somewhere deep inside, I already knew she was right. Vanessa had not been trying to embarrass me. Embarrassment was only the surface. What she truly wanted was something far more dangerous. She wanted to convince everyone around me that I no longer mattered. That I was fragile. Confused. Outdated. Easier to manage than to respect. Easier to erase than to confront. Margaret squeezed my hand softly before letting go. "I may be wrong," she said carefully, though her face showed she did not believe that herself. "But I think you need to start paying attention very closely." I looked down at my untouched coffee growing cold between my hands. Then slowly, for the first time since Harold died 3 years earlier, something unfamiliar began settling beneath the grief and loneliness I had carried for so long. Not fear. Not sadness. Awareness. Cold. Precise. Dangerous awareness. After leaving the cafe, I drove home more slowly than usual, keeping both hands tight on the steering wheel while Margaret's words repeated themselves inside my mind with exhausting clarity. Socially first. Then legally. The rain had stopped by then, but low gray clouds still pressed heavily across the Connecticut sky. Every traffic light seemed longer than normal. Every familiar street looked slightly unfamiliar, as though the world itself had shifted while I was not paying attention. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes staring at the front of my house. Harold and I bought this place 36 years earlier after living in a cramped apartment above a hardware store during Michael's childhood. We painted every room ourselves. Built the back deck together one summer despite having no idea what we were doing. Michael carved his initials into the maple tree near the mailbox when he was 13. This house contained my entire adult life. And suddenly I wondered if someone else had already started making plans for it behind my back. Inside, the silence felt different now. Less comforting. More observant somehow. I hung my coat carefully near the front door and walked through the house room by room without fully understanding why. The dining room. The office. The guest bedroom Vanessa always claimed felt too cluttered. I noticed tiny things I would normally ignore. A folder on my office desk slightly out of place. One of the filing cabinet drawers not fully closed. For a moment I stood there staring at it while unease crept slowly through me. Then I crossed the room and opened the drawer completely. Inside sat neatly organized folders containing tax returns, insurance policies, property records, and investment statements Harold spent years carefully maintaining. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Yet something felt wrong. I pulled several folders out and placed them across the desk. My homeowner documents were there. Retirement accounts. Utility records. But one folder labeled estate planning was missing entirely. I froze. Harold created that folder himself shortly before he passed away. Dark blue. Clearly labeled in his handwriting. I always kept it in the back left corner of the drawer beneath the insurance papers. Slowly, I searched the drawer again more carefully. Then another drawer. Then the bookshelf cabinet nearby. Nothing. A cold sensation spread through my chest. I tried forcing myself to stay rational. Perhaps I moved it months ago and forgot. But deep down I already knew I had not. My pulse quickened slightly as I crossed the room toward the small closet where I kept older storage boxes. After several minutes of searching through holiday decorations and photo albums, I finally found the missing folder placed inside an entirely different box beneath old wrapping paper. I stared at it for a long moment before lifting it out carefully. Someone had moved it deliberately. My hands felt strangely steady as I opened the folder on the desk. Most documents appeared untouched until I reached the final section. One paper immediately caught my attention. Assisted Living Research Notes. I blinked slowly. The page contained printed information about luxury senior communities throughout Connecticut and Rhode Island. Monthly costs. Medical support options. Waiting lists. Several locations had been circled neatly in blue ink. My breathing became shallow. I lowered myself slowly into the office chair while staring at the page beneath the afternoon light. I had never seen this document before in my life. Beneath it sat another sheet. This one far worse. Durable Power of Attorney Information Guide. My stomach tightened painfully. A yellow sticky note remained attached to the front. We should discuss timing soon. I did not move for several seconds. The entire house seemed unnaturally still around me. Then, quietly, another realization surfaced. Vanessa had not created these documents alone. She did not even have access to this office unless Michael allowed it. Which meant my son had either participated directly or stood nearby while it happened. Somehow that hurt more than everything else combined. Around 4 o'clock my phone rang. Michael. I stared at his name glowing across the screen while a terrible sadness settled over me. There was a time when hearing my son's voice instantly made any difficult day better. Now I felt only caution. I answered calmly. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom," he said warmly enough that anyone listening would have believed nothing in the world was wrong. "Just checking in. How are you feeling after the party?" Feeling. Such a careful choice of words. Not what did you think? Not did something happen. Feeling. I glanced toward the papers spread across my desk. "I am fine," I answered evenly. "Just tired. Vanessa thought maybe you seemed overwhelmed yesterday," he said after a slight pause. "You know how crowded those events can get." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. The narrative already forming quietly around me. Fragile. Overwhelmed. Emotional. "I managed perfectly well," I replied. Michael laughed softly, almost relieved by my calm tone. "Of course you did. Anyway, Vanessa and I were thinking maybe we could all have dinner Sunday night. Talk about a few future plans." Future plans. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "That sounds lovely," I said gently. "I would not miss it." After we ended the call, I remained seated alone in the office while evening shadows slowly stretched across the room. Then I looked back down at the papers on my desk and finally understood something important. They believed I was passive because I had always chosen kindness over conflict. They mistook grace for weakness, silence for confusion, trust for helplessness. And for the first time since this began, I stopped feeling hurt long enough to become careful. Sunday dinner at Michael's house began exactly the way carefully managed performances always do. Warm lighting. Expensive candles burning softly near the dining table. Jazz music low enough to sound sophisticated without interrupting conversation. Vanessa greeted me at the front door wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and the same polished smile she used at charity events and country club luncheons. "Evelyn, you look wonderful," she said as she kissed the air beside my cheek. "I am so glad you came." I smiled back with equal politeness while handing her the apple tart I had baked that afternoon. "Thank you for inviting me." The house smelled of rosemary chicken and fresh bread. Chloe sat at the kitchen island scrolling through something on her phone while Michael opened a bottle of wine near the counter. Everything looked painfully normal. That was the unsettling part. Families rarely collapse in dramatic explosions. Most of the time they unravel quietly beneath routines that still appear loving from the outside. "Grandma," Chloe said distractedly before hugging me lightly. "Mom says you might finally start traveling more next year." I glanced briefly toward Vanessa, who was arranging wine glasses with precise movements. "Did she?" Vanessa laughed softly. "Only because you deserve less stress in your life." Less stress. Another carefully chosen phrase. During dinner, conversation remained comfortably shallow at first. Chloe talked about wedding venues near Newport. Michael described a possible expansion project at his firm in Boston. Vanessa discussed a holiday fundraiser she was organizing for the Children's Hospital Board. I listened calmly while butter candles flickered against crystal glasses and rain tapped softly outside the kitchen windows. Every few minutes I caught Vanessa studying me when she thought I was not looking. Measuring. Observing. Waiting. Halfway through dinner, Michael finally cleared his throat and set down his wine glass. There it was. The real reason for tonight. "Mom," he began carefully. "Vanessa and I have been thinking a lot lately about making sure you have the support you need moving forward." I cut another small piece of chicken slowly before looking up. "Support?" Vanessa leaned forward immediately, her voice warm with rehearsed concern. "You have been through so much since Dad passed away. Living alone in that big house cannot be easy anymore." I dabbed my napkin lightly against my mouth. "I manage perfectly well." "Of course you do," Vanessa said quickly. "Nobody is saying otherwise." But her tone suggested exactly otherwise. Michael folded his hands together on the table. "We just think it might be smart to start discussing future plans now while everything is calm." Future plans again. The same phrase from the phone call. Chloe looked slightly uncomfortable now, pushing asparagus around her plate without speaking. Vanessa continued gently. There are some beautiful communities near the coast now. Luxury places. Social activities. Wellness programs. People your own age. Your own age. I noticed how carefully she avoided saying assisted living directly. The strategy depended on soft language. Soft concern. Soft manipulation. I took a sip of water before answering. And what exactly would happen to my house? Silence flickered briefly across the table. Barely noticeable. But there. Michael answered. First. Nothing immediately. We would just want to help you manage things more efficiently. Vanessa nodded supportively beside him. There is so much paperwork involved with property ownership and investments. It can become overwhelming. I almost smiled at that. Harold had trusted me with every financial account we owned for over 30 years, while Michael still called his accountant whenever he forgot a tax deadline. But I kept my voice calm. I see. Vanessa relaxed slightly, perhaps interpreting my composure as surrender. Honestly, Evelyn, we only want what is best for you. And there is no shame in accepting help. Then came the line that changed something permanently inside me. Sometimes people do not realize when life has become too much for them emotionally. Emotionally. There it was again. The quiet campaign repeated directly to my face now. Fragile. Emotional. Overwhelmed. Michael stared down at his plate instead of looking at me. That hurt more than Vanessa speaking. He was not trapped or manipulated in that moment. He was choosing silence. Choosing comfort over loyalty. Choosing the easier side of the table. I set my fork down carefully. The room remained perfectly quiet except for rain tapping against the windows. Then I smiled softly. You know, I said gently, your father used to say something interesting whenever people tried to make decisions for others. Vanessa blinked slightly. What was that? I held her gaze calmly across the candlelight. He said real concern sounds very different from control. For the first time all evening, Vanessa's expression tightened. Only briefly. But enough. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, nobody is trying to control anything. Of course not, I answered smoothly. And I appreciate how deeply both of you care about my future. I let the words settle there politely while Chloe stared quietly at her plate. Then I reached for my wine glass with steady hands. I will think carefully about everything you have said tonight. Relief visibly crossed Vanessa's face. She believed the conversation had gone well. That was the remarkable thing about people who manipulate others for long periods of time. They eventually mistake politeness for obedience. The rest of dinner passed with forced normalcy. Dessert. Coffee. Small talk about wedding flowers and travel plans. But beneath the soft music and candlelight, something fundamental had shifted inside me. I no longer sat at that table as a confused widow trying to preserve family harmony. I sat there watching patterns, listening carefully, memorizing details. And by the time I drove home through the wet Connecticut streets later that night, I had already made a quiet decision of my own. Tomorrow morning, I was calling an attorney. Monday morning arrived bright and painfully clear after nearly a week of rain. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors of my kitchen while the coffee maker hummed softly beside the window. Everything looked unusually sharp in the morning light, as though the world itself had decided to stop hiding things from me. I dressed carefully that morning in a charcoal wool coat and pearl earrings Harold gave me on our 25th anniversary. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I suddenly understood something important. When people begin trying to reduce you quietly, maintaining your dignity becomes a form of resistance. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked into the downtown law office of Benjamin Holloway. Benjamin had handled several property matters for Harold years earlier, and was one of the few people my husband trusted completely. The office occupied the third floor of an old brick building overlooking Main Street. Tall windows. Dark wood shelves. The faint scent of paper and coffee lingering in the air. Benjamin himself looked older now than I remembered, his silver hair thinner, his reading glasses balanced low on his nose. But when he stood to greet me, his expression softened immediately. "Evelyn Carter," he said warmly. "It has been far too long." I smiled politely as we shook hands. "I wish this visit were under better circumstances." Something in my voice must have alerted him because his expression shifted almost instantly from pleasant to attentive. He led me into his private office and closed the door quietly behind us. For the next hour, I explained everything. The engagement party. The missing photographs. Margaret's warning. The paperwork I found hidden in my office. Michael and Vanessa discussing future plans over candlelit dinner, as though I were no longer fully capable of deciding my own life. Benjamin listened without interrupting once, his fingers folded carefully across the desk while morning light stretched across stacks of legal files beside him. When I finally finished speaking, silence settled heavily between us. Then Benjamin leaned back slowly in his chair. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "what you are describing is extremely concerning." I stared down at my hands resting in my lap. "Am I overreacting?" "No," he answered immediately. "In fact, I think you noticed this earlier than many people would have." He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. "The social isolation alone is troubling. But hidden estate documents and conversations about competency? That changes things." Competency. Hearing the words spoken aloud sent a cold wave through my chest. Benjamin opened a legal notebook and began writing several notes quickly. "First," he said calmly, "you need to secure every important financial and legal document immediately. Second, we should review your current estate structure today." I blinked slightly. "Today? I would strongly recommend it." There was no drama in his tone. No exaggeration. Somehow that frightened me more. Benjamin spent the next 2 hours reviewing every account, property document, insurance policy, and trust Harold and I had established over the years. By lunchtime, an uncomfortable truth emerged clearly. Michael still retained limited access to several family investment accounts Harold originally established years earlier for convenience. Nothing illegal had happened yet. But the structure created opportunity. Opportunity for pressure. Influence. Gradual control. Benjamin folded his hands together again once we finished reviewing everything. "Evelyn, I need to ask you something difficult." I nodded slowly. "Do you believe your son would intentionally manipulate your finances?" The question hurt in a way I could not fully describe. Because until recently, the answer would have been immediate. Absolutely not. Michael was the little boy who cried after accidentally breaking my favorite coffee mug at age 9 because he hated disappointing me. The teenager who carried groceries inside without being asked whenever Harold worked late. The young man who held my hand through Harold's cancer treatments 3 years ago while promising we would always take care of each other. But now I remembered him sitting silently at dinner while Vanessa described my emotions like symptoms to manage. I looked down toward the polished wooden floor before answering quietly. "I think he is allowing someone else to shape how he sees me." Benjamin's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes that is even more dangerous." By the end of the meeting, several decisions had already been made. Account permissions changed. New legal protections established. Property records updated quietly. Benjamin also recommended creating an entirely revised estate structure with independent oversight impossible for family members to influence privately. "You are still fully in control of every decision," he reminded me gently while sliding papers across the desk for my review. "And frankly, I suggest keeping it that way." I signed each document carefully with steady hands. Strange calmness settled over me with every signature. Not revenge. Not anger. Clarity. The kind that arrives when survival finally becomes more important than preserving illusions. As I prepared to leave, Benjamin walked me toward the office door before pausing. "One more thing," he said quietly. "Do not tell them any of this yet." I looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because people reveal far more when they believe they are still in control." Outside, the afternoon air felt colder than before. I stood on the sidewalk watching traffic move slowly through downtown, while church bells rang faintly somewhere in the distance. Then my phone buzzed inside my purse. A message from Vanessa. "Just checking on you, Evelyn. Hope you are having a peaceful day." I stared at the words for several seconds before locking my phone again without replying. Then I lifted my face toward the pale November sun and realized something almost unsettling. For the first time in weeks, I was no longer afraid of what they might do next. I was beginning to wonder what would happen when they realized I had finally stopped trusting them. 2 weeks later, Vanessa hosted the annual Winter Children's Charity Gala at the Fairfield Grand Hotel, the kind of event where wealthy donors wore black tuxedos and diamond earrings while pretending generosity came naturally to people who measured worth through appearances. I had attended the gala beside Harold for almost 15 years before his death. Back then, Vanessa used to introduce me proudly as the woman who taught her everything about philanthropy and grace. Funny how quickly people rewrite history once they stop needing your approval. The ballroom looked stunning that evening. Crystal chandeliers reflected against towering glass centerpieces filled with white orchids, while a string quartet played softly near the marble staircase. Waiters moved through the crowd balancing silver trays of champagne beneath warm golden lighting that softened every expensive surface in the room. I arrived alone wearing a midnight blue gown Harold once said made my eyes look younger. Simple pearl earrings. No dramatic entrance. No announcement. But when I stepped inside the ballroom, I immediately noticed something interesting. Vanessa had not expected me to attend. Her smile froze for half a second the moment she spotted me near the entrance. Tiny. Almost invisible. But enough. "Evelyn," she said quickly as she approached, recovering her composure with practiced elegance. "What a lovely surprise." Surprise. Not welcome. Not happy to see you. Surprise. I smiled warmly. "I received an invitation." Her eyes flickered briefly before smoothing again. "Of course you did. We have just been so busy organizing everything." I glanced around the ballroom slowly. "Clearly." Vanessa touched my arm lightly while lowering her voice. "There are several media sponsors here tonight, so things may feel a little hectic." Media sponsors. Another warning disguised as politeness. Another reminder about image. "I am sure I can survive a crowded ballroom," I answered calmly. For the next hour, I moved quietly through the event, observing everything the way Benjamin advised. Watching. Listening. Noticing who spoke to me naturally, and who suddenly seemed uncomfortable after glancing toward Vanessa first. Patterns revealed themselves everywhere once you stopped ignoring them. Several women greeted me warmly before awkwardly mentioning how relieved they were to see me doing well. One donor even squeezed my hand sympathetically and whispered, "You seem much stronger tonight than Vanessa implied." I smiled politely each time while something cold sharpened quietly inside me. She had been talking about me constantly, building an image piece by piece behind my back. Near 8 o'clock, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly as Vanessa stepped onto the small stage near the orchestra platform to begin the formal presentation. She looked radiant beneath the spotlight in a silver designer gown, graceful and composed while introducing major donors and speaking about community compassion. People admired women like Vanessa because they mistook polish for character. "Tonight," she said warmly into the microphone, "we celebrate not only generosity but also the importance of caring for those who become vulnerable and need our guidance most." My stomach tightened slightly at the wording. Vulnerable. Guidance. Everything with her carried two meanings. The audience applauded softly while servers refilled wine glasses across the room. Then Vanessa smiled toward my table. "And speaking of compassion, I want to recognize someone very special tonight. My wonderful mother-in-law, Evelyn Carter." Several guests turned toward me politely. Vanessa continued smoothly. "Family care has become deeply personal for us recently as we help Evelyn transition into a simpler chapter of life where she can receive the support she deserves." The room remained warmly attentive. Most people probably heard kindness in her words. I heard strategy. Public positioning. She was announcing my decline before I even agreed it existed. Vanessa smiled sadly toward the audience. Watching loved ones age can be emotional, but it teaches us patience and responsibility. Something shifted inside me then. Not anger. Clarity. Pure and complete. Slowly, I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up from the table. The ballroom grew quieter almost immediately. Vanessa's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time all evening. I smiled calmly toward the audience before speaking clearly enough for the room to hear. That is interesting, Vanessa, I said gently. Because I recently made several important decisions regarding my future as well. Complete silence settled across the ballroom now. Even the quartet had stopped playing. Vanessa's smile strained slightly beneath the stage lights. Evelyn, perhaps we can discuss this privately later. There is nothing private about family concern, I answered softly. A few people shifted uncomfortably nearby. Michael stood near the back of the ballroom, frozen beside the donor tables, his face pale beneath the chandelier light. I reached into my evening bag and removed a sealed cream-colored envelope. Earlier this month, after careful legal review, I transferred full control of my estate into an independent trust structure. Vanessa stared at me without blinking. I also updated every financial authorization connected to my accounts and property. The ballroom remained so quiet I could hear glasses clink faintly near the bar. Then I looked directly at Michael for the first time all evening. No one besides me now has access to any part of my financial affairs. Michael's face changed instantly. Shock first. Then realization. Vanessa stepped down from the stage quickly, her voice suddenly tight beneath the polished calm. Evelyn, this is not the time for legal discussions. I held her gaze steadily. Actually, I think it is the perfect time to clarify something important. My voice remained calm. Even gentle. Concern and control are not the same thing. A few people exchanged uneasy glances across the ballroom while Vanessa stood perfectly still beneath the chandeliers, unable to recover the room the way she normally could. Because for the first time, the image she carefully created had cracked publicly in front of everyone who mattered most to her. Winter settled heavily over Connecticut after the gala. Bare maple branches lined the streets like dark veins against pale gray skies while Christmas decorations slowly disappeared from storefront windows one by one. Life moved forward the way it always does after public humiliation. Quietly. Ruthlessly. In the days following the charity event, Michael called me 7 times. I answered none of them. Vanessa sent carefully worded text messages asking if we could clear up misunderstandings. I ignored those too. At first, the silence between us felt unnatural. Mothers are trained over entire lifetimes to repair tension before it grows uncomfortable. But eventually something surprising happened. The silence stopped hurting. One snowy morning in January, I stood in my kitchen wrapping china plates in newspaper while movers carried boxes through the front hallway. Sunlight reflected across the snow outside, turning the world almost painfully bright. I had sold the house 3 weeks earlier to a retired couple from Vermont who loved the old maple tree near the mailbox as much as Harold once had. The sale closed quietly. Efficiently. No family discussions. No permission requested. Just one deliberate decision after another. Margaret visited that afternoon carrying coffee and cinnamon rolls from the bakery downtown. She stood near the living room window watching the movers carefully wrap Harold's antique bookshelf in thick blankets. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I considered the question honestly before answering. Better than I expected. And strangely, it was true. Sadness still existed, of course. 36 years of memories do not disappear simply because you pack them into cardboard boxes. But beneath the sadness was something steadier now. Relief. The exhausting pressure of constantly trying to earn love from people determined to withhold it had finally lifted from my shoulders. Around noon my phone buzzed again. Michael. This time, instead of declining the call immediately, I simply watched his name glow across the screen until it stopped ringing. Then another message appeared moments later. "Mom, please talk to me. We are worried about you." I stared at the words for a long moment before quietly locking the phone again. Worried. Such a strange word after months spent slowly trying to reduce me into someone easier to manage. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small coastal town in Rhode Island nearly 3 hours away. Not a retirement facility. Not a supervised community. A beautiful white cottage near the water with blue shutters and a wraparound porch facing the ocean. The first morning there, I woke before sunrise and walked half a mile along the shoreline wearing thick boots and Harold's old wool scarf wrapped tightly around my neck. The Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath soft pink morning light, while waves rolled calmly against the sand. For the first time in years, nobody expected anything from me. Nobody monitored my emotions. Nobody tried to shrink me politely into a quieter version of myself. The freedom felt almost unfamiliar at first. Then one Saturday afternoon in early spring, someone knocked softly at my front door. I opened it expecting a delivery driver and froze slightly when I saw Chloe standing there holding a small overnight bag against her coat. Wind tangled her blonde hair across her face while uncertainty filled her eyes. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. For several seconds I could not speak. Then I stepped aside slowly. "Come inside before you freeze." We sat together in the sunroom overlooking the ocean, while tea steamed gently between us. Chloe looked older somehow than she had only a few months earlier. More thoughtful. Less certain of herself. "Mom is furious that I came," she admitted softly after a long silence. I stirred honey into my tea slowly. "And what about you?" Chloe looked down at her hands. I think I stopped recognizing our family for a while." Pain flickered briefly across her expression. "Everything became about appearances. Connections. Reputation. I did not even realize how often Mom spoke about you like you were some kind of problem to manage." I remained quiet because some confessions deserve silence more than interruption. Chloe swallowed hard before continuing. "After the gala, people started talking. Questions came up. Dad and Mom kept arguing constantly." She hesitated. "Dad looks tired all the time now." For a moment, sadness moved through me unexpectedly. Not because Michael suffered consequences, but because somewhere beneath all the manipulation and cowardice, he was still the little boy who once waited nervously by the window every evening for me to come home from work. "Your father made his choices," I said gently. Chloe nodded slowly. "I know." We sat quietly after that while waves rolled against the shoreline beyond the windows. Then Chloe looked at me carefully. "Are you happier here?" I glanced toward the ocean glowing silver beneath the afternoon light. The answer came easier than I expected. "Peaceful," I said softly. "I think peaceful matters more." That evening, after Chloe left, I stood alone on the porch wrapped in a blanket while cold sea air moved through the darkness around me. Lights shimmered faintly across distant boats near the harbor while somewhere below, waves continued their endless rhythm against the shore. I thought about family photographs then. About all the years I spent trying to stay visible inside rooms where people quietly preferred me absent. In the end, that was the cruelest part of betrayal. Not losing your place inside someone's life. Realizing they had already started erasing you long before you noticed. But standing there beneath the cold spring stars, I understood something else too. They thought age made me weaker because they confused softness with surrender. What age actually gave me was clarity. And once you finally see people clearly, you stop begging to remain inside places where your presence was never truly valued to begin with.